Call this meeting to order. So we'll go around the table again for ourselves for the record. Joey, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Julie Tucker, for Assembly Council.
John Weddleton.
Tim Stimps.
Bill Evans.
Ellie Briggs.
Dick Traney.
Robert Harris.
Ethan Berkowitz.
Bill Falsey. Lance Wilbur.
Mike Abbott.
And Forrest is on the phone, I'm told.
Yes.
Anybody else on the phone with you? Amy? No. Mr. Mayor, we're going to turn time over to you. Start off first, right?
Thank you very much. Are you Mr. Chair today?
It's
Yes.
the Rules Committee.
Okay, good.
I'm chairman of it.
I just want to make sure I got the titles correct here. This
We're
is-
interchangeable.
I've noticed, and I've heard that from many sources. We're here today as part of our continuing discussion of the upcoming budget. There's 6 items that require particular assembly attention. We talked about healthcare the other day. We're talking about the E911. I believe that'll be on Friday. But today there's 4 items that we wanted to bring to your attention for various reasons. One is the spending limit. The other is the MOA trust, and then AWU and ML&P also are items that require some of your attention. I want to kick things off sort of very quickly before I turn it over to Mr. Falsey about the spending limit. I think the desire that we all have is to wind up with a clear, consistent fiscal system, and that's particularly challenging in the times that we exist where the state system is in a state of charitably flux, less charitably turmoil, or even less charitably disaster. So we're in a position where we have to make sure that our system is clear. And the goal that we have is to synchronize the spending limit and the tax cap, and that will give us a measure of stability moving ahead. So that being said, if I could.
Just a second. Record note that Mr. Croft joined us. He's here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first on the agenda for this work session is AO 2016-130, an ordinance that deals with a little-known and long dormant piece of municipal code, an expenditure limitation on not the whole of the municipal expenditures. It does not cover the school district, it does not cover the utilities, it does not cover the enterprises, but it covers a portion of the general government operating and not capital budgets. And in order to get oriented to this subject, I think a little bit of history is helpful. It is generally remembered that the voters in 1983 adopted a tax cap. The tax cap was not proposed by the administration or the assembly. It was a citizen-led initiative, largely sponsored by men named Miller Keller from the Chamber of Commerce and Linda Rexwinkle from what was then called the Free Committee of the Anchorage Women's Club. What is less remembered is that, it is also remembered that then Mayor Knowles campaigned very actively against the tax cap. What is less remembered is that Knowles proposed an alternative to the tax cap, which became our Anchorage Municipal Code 610-037. What we are proposing in this ordinance is to synchronize those two up. The spending limit looks similar to the tax cap, but has many different features. The spending limit, in addition to operating not government-wide, but only on a fraction of the general government operating budget, adjusts annually for changes in population and for CPI, and not on a 5-year average like the tax cap. And it does not account for emergency expenditures, and it does not allow you to address the physical growth of the municipality through new construction and new property improvements. What was surprising is that after we had the two provisions both on the books at the same time, they were never sort of looked at again. The reason that is surprising is because if you wind the clock back to the summer of 1983, the sponsors of the tax cap came to the Assembly, came to the public hearing on the spending limit, and testified that if the Assembly passed the spending limit, you would still need a tax cap. Tax cap is a better system. And they said they had some concerns about the spending limit. Mr. Keller in the testimony testified that one of the main concerns was the effect that the negative factor in either CPI or population growth would have on the overall formula because it didn't include the additional relief valve of new construction. And further said that if you passed the tax cap, the spending limit would become defunct. Well, winding the clock forward, we ended up with both. The Assembly passed the spending limit and we got the tax cap. no one really looked at that initially because, unsurprisingly, the Knowles administration proposed spending limit was significantly higher than the tax cap in the go-go years of the 80s. Population was booming, CPI was very high. What we have come to discover more recently is that the spending limit disappeared from history around 1992. It used to be that both the tax cap and the spending limit were included as appendices in the annual budget, so everyone in the assembly could see what the spending limit calculation was. For reasons totally unclear to us, in about 1992, it just ceased to be a part of the budget and it went dark. When our administration came on board last year, Lance Wilbur showed you the spending limit calculation in our proposed budget in 2016. That was probably the first time that spending limit calculation seen the light of day in 20 years. When we started calculating the spending limit this year, we ran into the scenario that the tax cap authors predicted. This is the first time in history, since 1983, that CPI is slightly deflationary, it's negative, and Anchorage's population has decreased. And in that circumstance, the spending limit formula goes a little bit haywire. It's sort of a division by zero, it does not compute. The provision in the code that now says that increases in spending should be limited by a certain factor are not going to limit increases, but if applied literally, will actually force a contraction in the budget. The other thing that was surprising to us as we sat down to do the spending limit calculations this year was that our budget called for some use of fund balance. These are not new tax dollars we have to collect, this is money in the bank. So to make this concrete, this year, through we have a police and fire retirement pension fund. The actuaries tell us how much needs to be in that fund, depends on how long we expect retirees are going to last, how sick they're going to be. Through no fault of anyone's, the actuaries went back, rejiggered the calculations and said, actually, we're a little underfunded, we're short, we need to find another $3.3 million to put in that fund. We have that money in the bank. We don't need to actually collect taxes for that. We can apply fund balance to that. But the way the spending limit is constructed, that use of $3.3 million that's already in the bank has to be offset by a cut in services of $3.3 million somewhere else. And we said, that doesn't seem right, and that seems like that must be a problem that was encountered in previous years. I wonder what they did. So then we went to OMB and said, can you find us all the spending limit calculations? And that's where we began to piece together this history. What we discovered was, in the early 80s, the spending limit was sky high. It made no difference. It appeared in the budget. In 1992, for reasons totally unclear, it totally disappeared. At that point, it never became a public calculation. And we have pieced together the records, which were spotty and difficult to compile. We learned that most of the time, the spending limit, where it was calculated internally, was calculated at the first quarter revised budget, although that's not set in code anywhere, and sometimes it was games where they proposed a budget which complied, and then the revised budget didn't comply. Sometimes the spending limit was calculated at other times, even after additional supplementals. So there was some gamesmanship involved. And then, most surprising of all, there were at least 5 times where if we calculated on the basis of the data that we have, at revised, the budget did not comply with the spending limit at all. Probably wasn't unlawful because the Assembly created the spending limit. They could pass a budget, didn't comply with the spending limit. But I don't think there's any evidence the Assembly was ever even told that the budget that they were given didn't comply with the spending limit. And so as we went through history, we found that at first quarter revisions, it certainly looked like in prior administrations, the budgets in 1998, 2001, 2003, 2010, and 2013 didn't comply. 2013 was about $10 million over the spending limit because in that year, about $7 million of tax capacity that historically had gone to the school district was pulled over in the general government operating budget. Because the spending limit applies only to the general government operating budget, even though that changed the tax cap not at all, that pushed it way above the general government operating spending limit. And again, I don't believe the Assembly was ever told about that. I will say, as we have been looking at these old figures, the 2010 figure, the only internal figure we could find was a figure that was significantly over the spending limit. It's not clear that that was ever finalized, and we actually think there was a flaw in the way they were doing that calculation. They probably could have got that one to comply with the spending limit, but again, it's all sort of gone dark. So as we sort of encountered this history, we saw that there were 3 options available to us. We could continue the ways of the past and either bury this and just never talk about it, or we could engage in some gamesmanship, propose a budget that did comply with the spending limit and then radically change it in the first quarter, or we could just fix it. And our choice here was just to fix it. So what we're proposing in the ordinance is to attend to the original critiques of the spending limit way back in 1983 and to make some adjustments to the formula itself to say that it should be based on a 5-year rolling average, that there should be some accounting for expenditures related to emergencies, and that there should be some accounting for the physical growth of the municipality through new construction of property improvements. But also, and much more significantly, to say that the tax cap is what the voters have chosen. That is what really matters to your own pocketbook. And that is what the voters have corrected with amendments over time, whereas the spending limit was adopted in 1983 and never touched again. So to put the tax cap in the driver's seat and say this becomes the fallback, that if ever the tax cap is repealed or significantly eroded, that this is what would then come online. So we have a general government spending backstop, but that the tax cap is really the driver's seat. So it aligns the formulas, so the formulas are operating similarly and puts it in the position that it was originally supposed to have. I'm happy to take questions or pass it further down the road.
Thank you, Ms. Grayjack.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I was staff to the assembly in the 90s. Well, I started in '88, but in the 90s, and this is really interesting because I don't ever remember the tax limitation being talked about. Period. So could you tell us again how many times this was ignored in the 90s?
The best we can figure, and I mean this was actually kind of telling in and of itself. There's no binder of spending limit calculations. There's no record of the official spending limit calculation in the budget. So we have really pulled a bunch of boxes off the shelves. The best we can tell, we have no history of any calculations at all in 1992, 93, 94, and I believe 95. Actually, you've got that sheet, so you can fact check that.
96.
In the years past 1995, you said 96 too, 96, past 1996, we have no record of it ever being talked about in any public way at all. Internally, we have very spotty records in the 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14 time period. There are some unfinished calculations that we don't think were ever finalized. But if we take the actual budgets and apply the formula at revised, it certainly seems like there is no way that you could have proposed a revised budget in 1998, and in the years I've got listed here, 1998, 2001, 2003, 2010, or 2013, that complied with an asterisk on 2010, which is I think that they were using, I won't further digression, the spending limit has a lot of very ambiguous language. And it was not well scrutinized for many years because it was either sky high or being ignored. I think that certain categories of expenditures were miscategorized in the 2010 era, and you probably could have made the spending limit work if you categorized them the way I think the law actually does require you to categorize them, but the only internal document we have is one that says it didn't work. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but at least half a dozen times. And I should also have said that the real bottom line is, so far as we can tell, the spending limit has never actually done any work. It has either been above the tax cap or ignored or gained. So there is never a moment in history where the spending limit has had an actual constriction effect on it.
Thank you. If I could just follow up really quick. I consider myself a part of history. And like I said, I am. This is really interesting to me because when I was staff in the assembly, when budget, with the director, I don't remember this being used before. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Forrest Dunbar, question, sir?
No, I don't have any questions.
Let's see, Mr. Evans, sir.
I too consider Ms. Gray Jackson a part of history.
Thank you.
So, if I understand correctly, the adjustments you're proposing to the spending limitation will render them going forward co-equal to the tax cap. That the calculations, to the extent that they're done, both would be, one wouldn't contradict the other. Is that correct?
That is not strictly true, and the reason is because the two start from totally different points of view. The tax cap is about the total amount of money that the municipality-wide can collect from people's pockets, and that is the school district and general government. this expenditure limitation has only ever applied to a portion of the general government budget. You peel away all the user fees, you peel away categorical things, you peel away other things. The only way to make the two calculations completely synchronous would be to say something like that the expenditure limitation is repealed or should not preclude you from spending any amount of dollars that you're allowed to collect within the tax cap. So we didn't do that, although certainly that's a viable alternative. We could replace it with something that was almost identical to the tax cap. What we instead did was say that that expenditure limitation that is in code should have many of the features that the tax cap has. Those features are emergency expenditures, 5-year averaging, and use of tax dollars for physical growth of the municipality.
If I may follow. So the changes you're proposing currently address the restrictions that the spending limit would place on this year's budget.
I believe that is true, although I will tell you that in our deep dive into the history, we have not run the figures this way, and the reason is because our sense was that the tax cap is what should matter, and the budget does work with the tax cap. So if and only if the tax cap were to go away, I think an alternative should be put on the table, but we can certainly find out that information.
And my last question is, given all that history and the seemingly historical ineffectual use of the spending limit, it seems like the only reason you're not simply eliminating it instead of revising something that never plays out is because it looks like here you're saying in case the tax cap is ever repealed, we'll have a fallback. And do you perceive any likelihood or any kind of movement towards actually repealing the tax cap?
I don't foresee a repeal of the tax cap, and certainly that would be an alternative, just to take it out of the code altogether. I think the notion was that when it was originally proposed, it was supposed to be a fail-safe alternative to the tax cap, so to the extent that that had some merit, we'll follow that history too, but certainly it's up to the Assembly's preference. I think both would get us effectively to the same place.
Thanks.
Mr. Whittleton, sir.
That was my question. Just why not delete it if it's not used? So we got around to it.
Other questions from assembly members? Mr. Cross? No. Forrest, any questions, sir?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. I guess the only road that was here in '92. I was on the Assembly in '92, and Tom Fink was mayor. This just never came along. It's been interesting how many times administrations have ignored it. I appreciate you guys at least stepping up to the plate and not ignoring it, not trying to massage your feelings. So thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, do you want to go to the next one, the MOA?
Hold on.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Robert Harris. So the proposal in the ordinance is to increase the dividend payout from 4% to 4.25%. This was, I've handed out some things just sort of as backup for that. The Investment Advisory Commission met last month on September 14th, looked at it, and based upon sort of the conservative estimate, 4.25 would be a number that continues us to grow the fund and is sort of underneath those sort of market averages of payouts. In this case, 4.35 would be the general payout average across this industry. Right now, we're looking at 4.25. And I have on the back I guess the one thing I would say is that the reason that this initial piece was put in place back in 2010 was to allow the fund to recover from its downturn in 2007. It started in 2007 at 140. It had dropped as low as 87. By 2014, I believe the number was back up to the $140 million number from the trust. So the trust has recovered in its entirety from the dip of the 2009 period. And right now we're still catching up on some of the inflation proofing. We will still continue to inflation proof at 4.25. We'll extend that time out just slightly, but this is a reasonable number and reflects a prudent financial decision as far as managing the returns from the investment trust, from the MOA trust.
Questions, Mr. Croft, first, and Mr. Evans.
Familiar with this mainly from the percent of market value on the permanent fund discussions and recall payouts anywhere from 4 to 5. That proposal had a 5-year averaging. Is this on actual last year's or any average?
I believe this is 5 years as well. Right, 20.
And so most others go, 4 1/3 to 4 1/2.
Right.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Evans, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I forgot my glasses, so if I'm not seeing this correctly, excuse me out. But when I looked at it before, it was my understanding that the measure we took in 2010 to restrict the dividend back to 4% was a temporary measure until the fund actually regained its previous status to 2007, adjusted for inflation.
Right.
But at that point, once it does that, technically that limitation would no longer apply, and you'd be back to, look at this paragraph, D or whatever. I think it's
5%.
5%.
So if you're saying that the fund has actually achieved that, and it's actually made it back to the point where it is now adjusted for inflation back to the pre-2007 level, it seems like you don't need any legislation to make it 4.25. You have authority to 5. You can limit it to 4.25 if you want. Am I mistaken about that?
Well, I think the 4.25 versus the 5 right now accounts for the inflation proofing as well. The corpus has I think the corpus in 2007 was 140, and right now it's at 148. So we're back to the pre-2007 levels. But I think part of the 2010 action was to also keep padding some money in there to sort of take care of the inflation proofing. We haven't reached that new number yet. We're, I think, about a $10 million difference off of that. This will continue to inflation proof the MOA trust. It'll stretch it out a few more years, I think 7 or 8 or 9 more years. I'll give you the right number. But we have certainly recovered from the pre-2007 levels.
Anything else, Mr. Evans? Mr. Steele, anything?
I guess there's some advantage to having larger trucks and more engines. It doesn't seem to me like it matters much, since we can just forget about it for 10 years or whatever. Anyway, whatever folks think is right.
Mr. Wolf, any concerns, questions, or anything?
No, but thank you.
Forrest, any concerns, questions?
No, I'm good.
That appears to be the only question on that item. Let's move on to AWWU.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to speak about both utilities' proposed rate increases that we're asking the Assembly to act on before the end of the year. We have recommended for introduction and public hearing on November 1st a 9.5% rate increase for the sewer utility inside of Anchorage Water and Wastewater. So, as you know, AWW is made up of 2 about equally sized utilities, one water, one wastewater. The one we're referring to now is the wastewater utility. The recommendation is for a 9.5% rate increase for that unit, not the water side. The water side does not require a rate increase at this time. The primary factor driving that is the historic and the anticipated capital requirements of the sewer business. As you can well imagine, it's a capital-intense business, and we have an aging infrastructure and a need to update it on a consistent basis. So we spend tens of millions of dollars a year in a capital program in the sewer utility. That's not going to go down at all. If anything, it's going to go up. And this does not include any rate impact associated with significant upgrades that may be required in sewage treatment, either in Girdwood or, more importantly, at Asplund for the Anchorage Bowl. So this rate increase will help the utility adapt. There's marginally larger operating costs associated with taking better care of the infrastructure that we have, but even that will not fully forego the need for an aggressive capital program going forward. So that one has been introduced, and I had a brief discussion with Mr. Steele before we started today. We're requesting a public hearing date on 11/1, and we're obviously willing to work with the Assembly through any process you'd like to get further information on that rate change. One fact to note, right now, a typical residential water and sewer bill is a little over $90. With the proposal that the administration has recommended, that would change to a little over $93. So, I said, it's a 9% increase on the sewer portion of the bill, but that translates into about a 4% increase on the total typical residential single-family water sewer bill. So that's the AWU proposal, Mr. Chairman. Be glad to answer any questions on that right now. As I said, we're not looking to do a detailed presentation today, but wanted to inform the Assembly and find out how you guys wanted to talk about this going forward.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Evans?
Yeah, just again, I can't see the documents, I'm going off memory.
Put my glasses with that.
Maybe anything. But if I recall correctly, I read that there was a reimbursement to taxpayers by AWWU, I think it was 2015, for both water and wastewater, it said. I just couldn't figure out exactly why I would be reimbursing them in 2015 and then have the need for the big increase in 2016. If you could explain that.
I'm going to let Brett or Glenda handle that.
I can explain that. I'm Glenda Gibson, Finance Director for Acreage Water and Wastewater Utility. Our last rate increase for utilities was in 2014. January of 2014, we increased rates. The RCA, the Regulatory Commission of Laws, has suspended it into a docket. We had a bunch of discovery, went through the rate case process. We managed to come to a settlement with RAPA, Regulatory Affairs Public Advocacy Group, that was a rate slightly less than what we had filed for in 2014. So we did a slight refund in 2015. This rate case, the 9.5% increase, will be based on 2015 actual results and expenses. So.
Basically, and thank you, Glenda, when we seek a rate increase, the RCA typically gives us the ability to collect the full amount of the proposed rate increase essentially immediately. And in the case of the proposal that's before you now, it would start in January, assuming the RCA gave us that interim approval. Then, after months or longer, they would make a final determination. If that determination turns out to be less than what they'd originally granted, we're in a refund position. So that's I think that leads to what you're seeing and what other people may see on their bills and other things.
The 9.5% would be interim and refundable until the case is settled.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Mr. Steele, your head of enterprise activities, any questions?
Hi, on this increase, it seems like there's a fail-safe with regards to our looking over our shoulder one way or another. And we're building that in. We're not going to rush right out and spend it all.
No.
So that in case they hit us, we're not going to be in a tough time. Do they usually give you time to pay?
Generally, depending on the size of the refund, they will give us time to pay it back. Generally, we have to pay it back within like 90 days of the final order. And when we seek our interim and refundable rate increase, the RCA has been ordering us to put the money that we collect for the increase into an escrow account so that the cash is available to pay the refund. They actually give us a choice of agreeing to pay 10.5% interest on it or put it into escrow. We chose escrow.
We are going to have some major expenses with regards to AWW at some point. I don't know when it's going to be. I suspect on both the distribution system or the collection system and also on the treatment plants. And I don't think there's there's much to gain by keeping it low at this point, when we know we're gonna have some costs going forward. So, I don't know, I'll have to talk with, Ms. Gray Jackson with regards to whether she wants the enterprise committee to hear this and take testimony or whatever, or whether you wanna do that in finance.
Can I follow up
Wait a
on that,
minute.
Mr. Chairman? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The rules committee is made up of whole.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that having a discussion at this level is probably sufficient. If anybody feels differently, let me know. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Wilton, sir.
Yeah, so, do people notice the increase that they squawk if you get 1,000 phone calls, why does it go up $3 a month?
We're going to get 1,000 phone calls. We'll get a handful of phone calls when we have a rate increase, but there has not been generally an overwhelming pounding on the door of well, this is a horrible thing. We have a small component of people that are against any kind of increase for any purpose or at any time. But we have had an outpouring of grief from customers over the past few years of rate increases.
Yeah, but didn't you just put an award for having good water?
We did.
Wastewater.
That too. Our Aspen plants and Big River plants won awards for their 2015 performance record. In 2015, we were awarded the Platinum Award for excellence in management of water utility. So we have a pretty good track record all the way around. Part of that is because of the community's commitment to continuing to invest in not only the collection system, which is the preponderance of our investment, but also in the operation and maintenance, upkeep, and enhancement of the plants. A lot of the increase in the sewer expenses for 2017 that we're trying to capture have to do with recovery of expenses that we put into the improvements at the Aspen wastewater plant, as well as operational costs like increased gas usage and increased natural gas costs to make sure that our incinerator is operating in full compliance with the top 5 permit that we have.
Mr. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do our rates compare to rates in other cities around the country?
We're in the middle of the pack. We regularly compare our rates to other folks in the northern tier and throughout the Alaska and larger cities around the country. We're substantially lower rates than Portland, Seattle, San Francisco. We're a little bit higher than some of the plants and some of the utilities in the southeast, although, for example, Atlanta has had a huge problem with upkeep of their infrastructure, and they're trying to make up for that with continued rate increases. In DC, a community that has had some significant financial issues with respect to water and wastewater over the past decade, they've recently moved to try to meet federal mandates for immense stormwater regulation, or stormwater and wastewater costs by funding combined sewer overflow mitigation with a 100-year bond issue. So the bonds will be paid off for fully 100 years. So there's a variety of instruments that other communities are using, but we're not out of the ordinary with respect to our peers anywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As we compare to Honolulu, because now they've had a process going through federal approval of a new system for treating wastewater.
I don't remember the specifics of their rates, but we're on par. They have had a tremendous need to improve their secondary plant, to move secondary to one of their plants after they lost their 301H exemption from the secondary treatment rule in 2010. At that time, the Region 9 of EPA granted them a 30-year time frame, more or less, depending on certain steps along the way, for them to employ secondary treatment at all wastewater from Honolulu. So if we're on par now, they will be suffering a much greater expense in the future with respect to the operations of their wastewater plant because of the move to secondary.
Is Ashland still operating on a temporary permit from the feds?
Well, I wouldn't call it a temporary permit.
Whatever phrase you want to use.
We have the permits are supposed to be good for 5 years. And we first gained our 301H permit in 1985. It was reauthorized in the mid-90s, reauthorized again for the most recently in the year 2000. So that would have carried us through to 2005. It's now 2016, so we've been under an administrative extension of that permit for 11 years. The EPA has not acted, although we submitted a request for reauthorization timely in 2005. The EPA has not acted on that, and we don't have a commitment from EPA to do so. So we're happy with the permit that we have, and we'll continue to operate and keep it signed up as best we can.
Jim?
Yeah, we currently treat primarily. But we're probably one of very few cities our size that have a present treatment. One of these days, I suspect EPA is going to say, yeah, I know you're getting disbursement out offshore and everything looks good, but the standard around the country is a secondary treatment.
Well, secondary treatment is defined in regulation as a certain level of treatment. You look at the influent characteristics of the wastewater and the effluent characteristics of the wastewater, and you have to meet 30 parts per million of total suspended solids and 30 parts per million of BOD, and 85% total removal of those index constituents. Currently, we are, although we have a primary plant using only physical separation processes and disinfection with our new hypochlorite system, we're getting close to 50% removal of BOD, and this month we hit 85% removal of total suspended solids, which is the secondary standard. So the plant, because of the way that our operators are working it, has been very efficient, and we don't believe that an enhancement or an upgrade to a secondary process would benefit the environment or certainly not the ratepayers. to
That's
a significant
measured a
degree.
certain distance from the outfall or in the mixing zone, or how is that measured, or is it at
It's 85% removal of what's coming through the plant, so
Okay.
the discharge from the plant has about 15% of the suspended solids that are introduced into the plant in the headwaters.
So that's prior to dilution.
Yes, then that's dispersed and diluted within the zone of initial dispersion.
So at that point, we're getting great.
That's right.
You know, the equivalent of tertiary treatment. So it may not be as imminent as I had feared.
I
If
don't
we're
know
getting
what's going to
85%.
happen. We haven't been able to get a clear reading from that from the EPA. We've had some signals that had suggested that it was only a temporary measure. We've had other signals that suggested that they're not going to look at it for a long time to come. So
Do we have a surface water intrusion in our system, and how high is it? Do we have intrusion into our collection system?
Maybe.
Such that.
Yeah, we've got all sewer systems, because they're below ground, are going to be subject to stormwater influx from inflow, which is basically ways to capture surface water runoff, and infiltration, which is groundwater that seeps into leaks in the pipe. We've done a pretty good job of controlling that with the anchor pole system that discharges at Aspen. We're continuing to invest in girdwood to keep the infiltration problem there more significant, because it rains more in girdwood at bay. So I think that because we have separate sewers to begin with, and because
our condition assessment suggests that our sewers are in pretty good shape. I would say that we're probably better off than many communities with respect to infiltration and inflow into the wastewater.
So you need the rate increase to adjust for cost of living for the most part.
That's exactly right.
Any other questions? Forrest, any questions, sir?
Nope.
Okay. No questions, this meeting's over with. One more thing.
One more thing, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
No.
One more thing.
Oh, I did, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's not on the Assembly agenda yet, but we wanted again to give you a heads up. The Mayor mentioned that there were 6 items that require Assembly action that the budget is based on. You've heard about 5 of them so far. The last is a rate increase for MLNP. And this one is not anticipated to be introduced to the Assembly until the first meeting in December. But we did want to make sure that you were aware that it was coming. This is the rate increase that has been discussed for several years now that is necessary to pay for the construction associated with Plant 2A. So we've been borrowing money to pay for the new plant at Plant 2A. The plant will come into service before the end of the year, and as a result, it'll be then ready for rates. And so we'll be able to roll the expenses associated with that debt into the rate structure for MLNP, and that we'll be doing. It is a large rate increase. There has not been a large rate increase at MLNP for a long time. We haven't had to, until we invested in the South Central Power Plant 7 or 8 years ago, we have not had major investments in our generation facilities for a long, long time. So between the cost of the South Central Power Plant and now the cost of Plant 2A, these will be very significant rate increases for MLNP ratepayers. So we don't have exact numbers for you yet, but expect something in the 25 to 30% range for residential electric rates. That is the anticipated impact. That's a blend of the portion of your electric bill that is the utility side of the expense and the portion of your electric bill that is the fuel side of the expense. So it's a little tough to determine because fuel price moves around a little bit, and different houses and different kinds of properties use electricity differently, and that can affect the rates, your peaking, et cetera. But rough order of magnitude, 25+% likely impact on residential customers.
Mike, when do you anticipate you'll have the number for us?
When we introduce it, which will be in the first meeting of December.
Go ahead and set your committee up, Tim. Deal with that rate increase. I anticipate a few people are talking about it. Mr. Littleton.
How would we compare with you guys electric after 20%?
We will be slightly above what you get percent. It's going to depend on what the rate increase ends up being, but there are currently some of the rates that they are lower than we are, and some that we are lower than them. But when the rate increase comes, it is likely that we will be slightly above them in all of the rates, so residential, small, commercial, large commercial.
Mr. Steele,
How much is the lag time between when we propose a rate, or do we actually implement the rate, and then the RCA takes a look at it? How's the time?
As Glenda mentioned, we will introduce it, and we will, at that time, ask for interim refundable rates. It generally takes about 45 days for them to suspend it into a docket, in which case that would be when they would look at interim refundable rates. So there will be a lag of anywhere from 45 to 90 days.
And are they gonna have heart failure, 25, 30%?
No, I don't believe that they will. I think they are aware of the cost of the plant and the cost to operate the plant, so I would think that they are expecting a number that is larger than the one for the sewer system.
Thank you.
Mr. Evans, anything, sir? No, sir. Mr. Dunbar, anything?
Yeah, I think we'll have a more in-depth conversation at the Utilities Enterprise Committee, but I guess my first question would be, we purchased $100 million worth of a gas field in theory to lower these costs and lower the bills, and I'm wondering if that helped offset anything here, if we have numbers on that. If there's a possibility to do some kind of calculation there to show how much higher it would have been, or is that not really online yet?
Mr. Abbott?
That information will be available, and it is significant, both the price impact of gas, also the new power plant, when it comes online, is considerably more efficient in terms of how much gas it uses to produce kilowatts. So both of those factors will definitely moderate the rate impact on customers.
Forrest, anything else there?
Well, I guess again, we're going to get more into this at the Utilities Committee, but if we do have this new, more efficient plant, it does seem a little bit strange that our price would be going up so much, and I suppose it's because our capital costs are so high, but I'm wondering what kind of work you guys are going to do to explain to the public that, if you believe this to be the case, this wasn't an optional plant, that basically we didn't just build this plant to have a nice new plant, but that our other plants were reaching the end of their lives, and it would have been even more expensive or, unsustainable had we not built this. Because as it looks like right now, we've built this shiny new plant, and even though it's more efficient, our customers are getting the same power at a higher price.
I'm sure the administration will get us that information as we move into the Enterprise Activities Committee phase in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Mr. Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else, Mr. Mayor?
No, nothing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thanks for being here. Now I think we're about done. There is a Rules Committee meeting tomorrow on Title 11, taxi cabs, 1 o'clock to 2:30. So please be here tomorrow. This meeting's over. Thank you.